We're delighted today to have Professor Cary Deck with us to talk about his time at ESL. Professor Deck is a professor at the University of Alabama of Finance and Legal Studies. He's the director of the Interactive Decision Experiment Lab, and he's the Bidgood Chair in Economics and Finance. And it's great to be with you today, Cary.
It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, so maybe you can start by giving us a feel for what was the time period you were at ESL?
So I was at ESL in the late 90s through 2001, so 98 to 2001.
Okay, so during that time period, who were your colleagues at ESL? Who were the people running experiments in the lab, the users of the lab?
So, I mean, it was actually just amazing. I don't think at the time I fully appreciated just how amazing it was, because you had, of course, Vernon Smith and Jim Cox and Mark Isaac there. Bart Wilson was there, Dave Porter, Stan Reynolds, Steve Rosenti. It was just this, kind of amazing set of faculty. John List was actually on the faculty at Arizona during that time, so I got to interact with him. And so there were all of these people who were just great, and then my colleagues, the other students in the program were, just amazing. Right? Mary Rigdon and I were in the same cohort. She was doing a lot of work on trust and reciprocity. Giorgio Caselli was doing the neuroeconomics work. Anna Gunther worked with Amnon over in management, but she was around a lot and doing stuff on coordination. A couple years ahead of me, you had Todd Swarthout, who was doing work on games and auctions. You had Duncan James, who was doing work on risk and asset markets. A few years behind me was Kyle Hampton, who did innovation and kind of market analysis. So it was just, that was amazing. And then there were all of these visitors. Right? Jim Murphy was there as a pre-doctoral fellow doing, resource economics and things like that. You had Rob Kurzban, who was a evolutionary psychologist who was there. Kathleen Johnson was there she did a lot of network and kind of network theory and experiments like that she and I worked on. So it was amazing, just the number of people and the diversity of research that was going on. And like I said, I don't think at the time I really fully appreciated just how special it was.
All these young people you mentioned have made very successful careers.
Yeah, I mean, it was just an amazing time, and then just so much diversity of research going on. It was really just incredible.
Okay, so maybe you can tell me, how did you first get involved with experimental economics? Is that what you wanted to do from day one, or were you somehow you came to want to do experiments?
So I didn't know about experimental economics as an undergrad at all. That was just not something I'd ever even heard of. And so, I was interested in I/O. The topics I thought were really kind of intellectually interesting: auctions and information, game theory and firm strategy, and a lot of those things. And that was all really kind of intellectually appealing to me. And I liked the ideas, but I was, kind of somewhat disillusioned with theory in that it seemed like the way things were being approached, wasn't really how people would tackle these problems. And it wasn't, if it was taking so much involvement to derive these strategies, why would I think that people were actually doing these things, right? How applied is this? How applicable, are these things? How much sense do they really make? And so, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And then I learned about, Vernon and the group that was at ESL. And this is at a time when they were doing the FCC spectrum auctions. So they were, designing these really kind of, novel, imaginative, institutions to try to solve these real world problems. Right? These are really complex settings, and they're trying to, different tweaks. Hey, if we do this, will it help? What if we do that? How is it going to change, the outcomes that we see? And so it was this very kind of real, tangible application where it's like, oh, I can see where this matters, and I can see where this is, connecting to what people actually do, or even better, how you could help people make better decisions or help get, kind of different outcomes. And then we're also doing other smart market stuff with water rights, electricity markets. And so really kind of once I heard about that and learned about that whole area, I just was hooked and never looked back. So tell me a bit about the graduate program. Were there classes in experimental economics to kind of introduce you to the topic? Is that how you? Yes. So there were specific experimental courses. I think Jim Cox taught kind of the first experimental course, and then there was a second kind of follow-up course that Jim taught. And then at this time, Kevin and Dan Hauser, who was also on the faculty there, and Vernon and Steve and Dave Porter created these, what they refer to as economic systems design courses. So these were courses that were, more aligned with, kind of developing market institutions, trying to create markets to solve problems, design new institutions, design new auction formats. And so there were kind of a series of those courses as well. And so, yeah, I probably ended up taking 5 or 6 different courses that were about experimental economics. Right? I took a course from Mark Isaac. It was an I/O course, but of course it brought in experiments and things.
Well, I mean, that's very unique. 5 or 6 courses in experimental economics. I think that's something that has never been offered anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, I was like I said, I was hooked. I was trying to take everything I could. So I would, jump in any class, that I could that was doing those kind of things, just to try to learn more and absorb more of what was going on.
So tell me about the research projects that you were doing when in your time at ESL. What research projects did you?
So I was, like I said, there was a lot of stuff going on, and so I was really fortunate that I was able to start a bunch of different kind of research projects in some different areas that really kind of just continued early and through my career and even through tenure, right, kind of with those projects and getting those things done. I was working on behavior in games, so I was looking at, everybody had to do a field paper, right, as part of the graduate program. And so I was working on behavior in games, and I had this experiment where we would change part of the payoffs in these extensive form games or these normal form games, and could test models like inequality aversion, which was relatively new at that time, quantum response equilibria, what those predictions were, fairness models, things like this. So I could test a bunch of different models with a fairly simple change in the payoff structure of the game. So I did that, and Jim Cox actually encouraged me to submit that paper to AER, which, again, I was just a graduate student at the time. I didn't really realize what, the low probability event that was, but it got accepted. While I was a graduate student. So I was just amazed. Like, hey, this is an easy job, right? This will work well. But I was doing that, and then I did other work with Jim Cox on extensive form games, the Cary Deck design, looking for reciprocity, looking at gender differences. Those papers still get regularly cited, even though it's been 20-something years, since we did those projects. So I was working on those. Bart Wilson was there, and he had been at the FTC and was interested in kind of more traditional I/O types of topics at the time. And so we were thinking about how the internet might change pricing behavior and strategies, and so we were doing all of these kind of, alternative, kind of games based on a varying model of sales, right? So you have captive consumers and some who search, and we were thinking about how the internet was going to change search habits and how frequently people searched. One of my absolute favorite projects I ever worked on was this one on the ability to track customers on the internet and be able to identify how many rivals they had already visited. So they might go on to someone else, but the internet would give you the opportunity to actually track, this person hasn't been anywhere yet. So maybe they're not going to search, or they've been to one rival. So I've got to beat one person, but maybe they will or will not go on. And
this topic is ahead of its time, right?
So it really was. It was great. But I was so proud of this paper. We'd worked hard on it. I thought it was a really good paper. We send it off to a top journal, and we get a notice back from the editor telling us that serious economic journals were focused on what was, and that this kind of tracking and price discrimination just wasn't possible, and it wasn't something that a journal like that was going to take seriously, because they wanted to focus on what was, and not imaginary things of what could be. Which,
that's really funny. That's really
so funny. Yeah, I was like, well, we did our best to try to argue, no, you really can do this, and the technology is improving. But at the time, people really weren't aware of, cookies and things like that on the internet and the ability to do that kind of tracking. So, I remember getting that rejection letter, because it wasn't really a practical, thing.
That's a letter to frame. You should frame that one.
But we did lots of these kind of things with pricing algorithms. So one thing the internet would do was move like low price matching. Traditionally, in a brick and mortar world, is on the consumer, where they have to tell another firm, hey, I see this other price from your rival, and then this firm would match it. But online, the firms could easily monitor their rivals and simply implement those things. And so we're doing all kinds of pricing strategies like that and different kind of pricing algorithms. So there was that kind of line of work. And then my dissertation was on fiat money and causes of hyperinflation and what it would take to get trust in inflation or in the money again, right? So once you had a hyperinflation and people lost faith in the money, what would it take to get people to start using the cash again, right? And these are these kind of cash in advance models. It's kind of funny now with the advent of Bitcoin and some of these kind of private currencies, taking the government out of it. You're starting to see people worry more about those kind of things, right? When is the money stable? When will people accept it? What are the properties under which it would be, useful as a medium of exchange? But yes, so I mean, very different projects, but all of those led to several kind of different things. And then I worked on a variety of other small projects. Kate Johnson and I worked on a project on network formation. And again, it was a little bit ahead of its time, I think. So we had these kind of different algorithms or different institutions for being able to form links between players, and you could get indirect value from people. And having seen some of the smart market stuff that those guys were working on at ESL, we started thinking, oh, what if you could cross-subsidize? So I get value from this indirect link between you and someone else. Well, then, what if I offer to pay some of the cost for the two of you to be linked, right? And kind of thinking about those kind of cross-subsidizations, which is still something I don't see very much on in the literature when people are thinking about network formation and incurring the cost of links. It's usually about your own links that you're doing there. But yeah, so it was just a large
number
of things.
a lot of things to do in graduate school. So you made the most out of your years.
It was amazing, right? It was like I said, it was just all these people doing all these things, and I just I couldn't get enough of the different pieces, right?
So kind of speaking about technology, so how did the technology for running experiments differ? What was different about running an experiment in around the year 2000 during graduate school compared to now? Was it really much different, or are the differences relatively minor?
I think by that point, a lot of the differences were relatively minor between now and then. So early on, when I was at Arizona, Kevin McCabe taught a course on programming in Visual Basic, and I took the course and I learned a whole lot through that process. Richard Kaiser was there, and he was a great resource for figuring out what was wrong with my code and trying to debug it. And through that process,
and he still is.
I have no doubt that he is still great in that role. But I just remember lots of times being able to, hey, Richard, do you have a minute? And he always did, right? He always, sometimes he'd say, well, come back. But Richard always had, kind of time to help, which I'm very, very thankful for. But between Kevin's class and Richard's kind of, guidance there, became pretty efficient at programming Visual Basic and things. And so, most of my early career, I programmed everything myself in what I ran. Now I'm able to get graduate students or hire programmers and things, but I still do some of the coding myself in Visual Basic. But in terms of the computer systems, right, it was mostly running local network style things. You were just starting to see some of the faculty using, HTML web-based, software for some of those experiments. But most of the graduate students were all using Visual Basic at that point. So I think that's, a lot of that is pretty similar in terms of the way the technology works and kind of running on that. So.
Yeah, so it sounds like the kind of real differences in technology were earlier, the real kind of leaps, big generational leaps in technology for running experiments. There's a big difference between 1990 and 2000, less of a difference between 2000 and now. Now it's,
I think that's right. I mean, now there's a lot that's moved onto the web, and you have things like Z-Tree and O-Tree that are very common. A lot of people, Z-Tree was being developed in that time, and people were starting to use it, but it wasn't quite as prevalent as it is now. But yeah, there were plenty of hand-run experiments going on at Arizona when I was there, and there were still some people using like the old Plato system in some of those, and certainly for some of the experiments that we did in class, I can remember Jim Cox trotting out some of these old, ancient, even at that time, ancient-looking software systems. I don't know, they were DOS-based or what they were, but it was, even at the time, they seemed kind of ancient. I remember several of us kind of laughing about that. But yeah, I think a lot of that technological jump happened in the 90s, and by the time I was there, by the time my cohort was moving through, it was fairly standard kind of network-based types of experiments.
Yeah. So let me ask you. So after you finished the program and left ESL and U of A, I mean, you've been very successful. How would you kind of summarize how ESL influenced your later research as when you moved to other institutions?
So it really just, like I said, just kind of continued from what I was doing there. I learned when I moved to Arkansas, that was my first position, out of grad school. And I was involved with building the behavioral business research lab there, and was able to take a lot of the kind of what I had experienced at Arizona, from the structure, from subject recruiting, from lab policies, and was able to kind of more or less try to recreate that atmosphere. And having had the experience and having had the background when I came into that environment, because I had such kind of a clear concept of how a lab ran and how things worked, I was able to kind of convince people that, yeah, this is a good system, and more or less able to kind of create that type of infrastructure. When I moved to Alabama about 5 years ago, we built the TIDE lab, the Interactive Decision Experiment Lab, and it operates on a lot of the same principles and structure that the ESL operated on. We have 3 computer labs, but they all look like little copies of the ESL. There's a detached control room in the back behind the subjects and all of those kind of things. So in a lot of that infrastructure and that kind of way of running things, I've simply tried to carry forward and replicate. And so that's kind of given me opportunities, to continue doing the same kind of research and continuing those streams. Intellectually, I think what I really got from being at ESL and around that dynamic environment was, being willing to kind of ask questions and push on things that were not necessarily the way they were being done, or sticking to situations where the model is tractable for what you're trying to look at, but to say, look, this is an interesting question. What kinds of things can we design? We can be imaginative, we can be creative, we can go and explore. Right? Economics is the study of how people behave. And by God, we can look at how people behave, and I think kind of that attitude and that kind of willingness to say, let's see, well, that's an interesting idea. I wonder what would happen if, and that can be enough to justify going and running experiments and seeing what happens, and that kind of mentality, I think is really kind of the biggest piece that's really kind of carried forward, and that kind of intellectual curiosity of just, well, let's see, that we can explore lots of different things.
Let me ask you one last thing, Cary. So, can you tell us kind of a story about something unusual or funny that happened at ESL while you were there?
Sure. So, Keynes has a quote that says, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, maybe, that there's no subtler or surer means to overturn society than to debauch the currency. So, my dissertation research was on fiat money. And there were treatments in which there was a government player, or actually 2 government players, and they would print money. At least they had the ability to print money, and they could compete with private sector individuals for goods, and they would introduce this cash. And invariably, they would print a lot of money, and the people would start to lose faith in the money. It would, prices would go up 100-fold, and then people would basically quit accepting the money. And so we would get these kind of complete breakdowns. I mean, just complete breakdowns in the money. And I'm sitting back in the control room, and the money collapses, and there's no trade for the period, and the next period starts, and basically nobody's willing to accept the money again, and so they sit there, and this goes on for a couple periods. And at some point, a student stands up in the back row. I'm like, what is this guy doing? Why is he standing up? And then he starts yelling. He starts screaming at what are you idiots doing? And blah, 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 and I walk out there and I'm like, sorry, what's going on? Somebody's doing this, and none of us are making money. And I mean, he starts swearing at people. He says, I want to know who's doing this. I'm going to punch you. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm just a grad student. I'm sitting there, what do I do? There's no other there's no faculty members around. There's nobody for me to turn to and say, help me. And so, I know if we dismiss somebody, we have to give them their show-up fee. So I get the guy back into the little waiting room, and I talk to him, and I say, look, we're going to have to dismiss you from this experiment. I'm going to give you the show-up fee, but because we haven't completed the study, I really don't know how much you've earned. And at that point, I think he was happy just to have his money and to leave. But yeah, so here was this, it was Keynes's quote in the flesh, right? It was, this guy was mad. I was afraid he was going to hit me. It's still the only time I've ever had a subject cuss at me in an experiment. And it was, yeah, it was amazing. But I mean, it's a great anecdote now. But at the time, as a graduate student, I didn't know what the heck was going to happen. But yeah, fortunately, we paid him. He left. He accepted U.S. money, and he left. And then I just had to end the rest of the experiment and tell the rest of the subjects I'll give them an extra, few bucks, and send them home. But yeah, it was,
That's
it was
a great
crazy.
story. That must have been a little bit stressful.
It was stressful, but in retrospect, it's a great anecdote. It goes right along with with the research. Maybe I should have tried to see if we could have restarted that economy after such a scene, but at the time, yeah, it was crazy. So.
Thanks a lot for sitting with me, Cary. It's been very, very illuminating.
Well, it's been a lot of fun. It's my pleasure, and bear down. Right? So.